Hi ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Green. This is another in my series of lessons on Algebra 1. We're in Unit 2 and we're going to be looking at some properties of mathematics today. Now, I know these properties are hard and you're going to be confused by them, but what I'm going to try to do is make them as simple as possible so that you can remember them. Okay, so the big idea here is you're going to benefit from doing these things because it will help you as you go forward in algebra and into different math courses. You will be going, oh, I understand that property, it will help me do this, and I understand that property and I can do this, and therefore it makes it really easy to do some things if you understand these properties. Okay. The first property we're going to talk about here is called the commutative property. Commutative, it comes from the root word to commute. Well, when people commute, they move from one place to another place or they change positions. And that's exactly what happens when you have the commutative property. Here I've got 3 apples and here I've got 2 apples. That's the same thing as saying I've got 2 apples and 3 apples. They commute, they change their position. Why? Because 3 plus 2 is 5, just like this one down here, and 2 plus 3 is 5. Right? Well, that's what we can do in mathematics. 3 plus 4 is the same thing as saying 4 plus 3. See how the 3 and the 4 changed position between on one side to the other side. Or 3 times 4 is the same as saying 4 times 3. Where does this come into play? A lot of times you'll be doing an operation and you'll come up with x4. And you go, well, x times 4, and you're going, well, that's the same thing as saying 4x. It's just a matter of rearranging the order of those things to make it more sensible and to put them in the order that is called the standard order. Okay? So that's what we would be looking at as the commutative property. Now, one of the other major properties that we have is called the associative property. The difference between the commutative property and the associative property is the introduction of parentheses. See these parentheses? If it's got parentheses, then it's going to be more than likely the associative property. Okay? What happens with the associative property? You associate 2 things together and add one more. Or you add one and then associate 2 things. See how the parentheses moved over what 2 items are being associated together. Now, when I was teaching in a regular school, I used to call this one the dating principle. One day, these 2 people will be associated together and this one's on the outside. The next day you come along and these 2 people are associated together and this one's on the outside. It's a lot like that. Okay? And that's what the associative property does. It means that we can move these parentheses around and associate 2 things together differently. Notice, both of these are plus signs, both of these are plus signs. Didn't change that any. Down here, notice both these are being multiplied, both these are being multiplied. Didn't change that any, but we can rearrange the order that's going on here. Where would this come into play? If you've got something like 3x times 4, okay? Well, we know we can use the commutative property and turn this around to x 3 times 4. That's still multiplying all the way across. And instead of associating these 2 together, I can now start associating these 2 together. And 3 times 4 is 12. And I would get x12 or 12x using the commutative property again. So I just used the commutative and the associative property to rearrange these things so that we could wind up with an answer that makes a little bit more sense. Okay? These will become almost automatic to you, but you got to remember that there are properties associated with them and how to use them. There are a few more properties you need to know. One of them is just, well, this is the book of duh. Okay? Duh. It's called the reflective property. The reflective property says something's always equal to itself. It's like looking in a mirror. It's always the same thing. 2 is equal to 2. 0 is equal to 0. 4 plus 7 minus 2 is equal to 4 plus 7 minus 2. It's the book of duh. Well, duh, they're equal to each other, right? So that's the easy one, the reflective property. Okay? There's another one that we call the symmetric property. Symmetric means that when you divide something in half, it's equal on both sides. Well, in this particular situation, the symmetric property means that if you start off with AB, then BA will also be true. So A equal to B, then B is equal to A. It just means that we look like we switch the order. Now, the difference between this and the commutative property is the commutative property has an operation in between, and this one has got an equal sign in between. So instead of being A plus B is equal to B plus A, what we're saying here is that A is equal to B and B is equal to A. So they're a little bit different in that respect, okay? So you just have to be aware that's what the symmetric property does for you. It allows you to turn these equal signs around. I'm sorry about that. Now, one of the things that comes up here is a lot of times when we're solving equations, we want to get x is equal to 4. But when we're solving the equation, we might wind up with 4 is equal to x. Well, you know what? We can now, by the symmetric property, turn that around and say x is equal to 4. This happens all the time, okay? Because when we're solving, we might wind up with the variable on this side as opposed to being on the side where we want it to be. And it becomes real easy to just turn them around. Now, the final one is called the transitive property. This one, it comes in all the time because you substitute. This is one that I call the NBA property, okay? Because you substitute. And when they substitute in the NBA or in basketball, they put one player in for another player, okay? Because they're equivalent or because it's going to make the team better. Well, in this particular situation, if we've got A and B equal to each other, and we've got B and C equal to each other, I can put the C in for the B, and it becomes A is equal to C. That's exactly what happens. In basketball, they pull one player out and put another player in, right? Well, that's what we're doing here. Only because they're equal to each other, we can replace one player with another player. This comes up a lot when you're doing some operations, and when you're solving some problems. You've already seen this a little bit in the sense that we said if we have 3x plus 2 and we say that x is equal to 4, you could stick that in there for the x. You're substituting something in there, right? So you can say 3 times 4 plus 2. Well, 3 times 4 is 12 plus 2 is 14. That's the way you could go about doing this. This got substituted in there, right? That's the transitive property of equality that you're using when you do that. Okay, now, how do you go about learning these? It takes practice, okay? You're going to have to put numbers with these, put examples down, write some flashcards if you have to. Get some 3x5 cards and write them down on the flashcards so that you can remember them. Practice them a little bit. You know what? These 5 properties will help you as you're going along in algebra, and I will be using them, and I'll say, oh, according to the commutative property or according to the associative property. You'll see me using them over and over and over again. Make certain you know what I'm talking about when I'm using them, okay? It will help you in the long run. Okay, I know there'll probably be some questions out of this one. Be sure to bring your questions to tutoring and or come to Class Connect and ask questions about it there. It is important that you understand these properties. I look forward to seeing you then or next time we're together.